There is a kind of man who does the right thing quietly, through the proper channels, in writing, with the evidence attached, and spends the rest of his career watching the people above him file it away. Merle Walker was that kind of man. He spent nearly 30 years warning Remington about what he had built. He put it in memos. He drew the solution. He calculated what it would cost to fix it. He sent the paperwork up the chain and watched it disappear into filing cabinets. He retired. He kept writing. He was 98 years old and still building rifles in a workshop in North Carolina when a journalist finally came to ask him about it. By that point, the trigger he had warned about was in approximately 4 million American homes. Walker was born in 1912 in upstate New York. He joined Remington before the Second World War, and he spent the conflict years working on military contracts inside the Ilion plant. When the war ended and the company pivoted toward the civilian market, Walker was the engineer they put on the problem of building a rifle that could compete with Winchester. He was 33 years old. He was good at his job in the way that becomes obvious only in retrospect, when you look at what he produced, how long it lasted, and how many people built their careers on top of it. The trigger he designed for the new rifle was genuinely exceptional. Clean, light, and consistent in a way that no factory trigger at the price had been before. Gunsmiths who had spent years fitting custom triggers recognized immediately what Walker had done. It became a significant part of why the rifle sold. As Walker wrote in his own hand in December 1946, before a single production rifle had reached a customer, it was capable of firing without anyone pulling the trigger. The mechanism at the center of the problem was a small floating component Walker had named the connector. It sat between the trigger and the sear, without being fixed to either. That float was the source of the exceptional feel. It was also what made the system vulnerable. If anything displaced the connector out of its correct position, dried oil, debris, or ordinary wear could do that, without any visible sign to the person holding the rifle. The trigger mechanism would then appear to function normally, while actually being held out of engagement by the safety alone. Moving the safety from on to off would fire the rifle. Walker called this a theoretical unsafe condition in his December 1946 memo. Another engineer who reviewed the memo described the situation as dangerous. The memo was filed. Walker did not stop there. In August 1948, he drew a blocking mechanism that would prevent the problem entirely. It was a small geometric change that would lock the trigger in place whenever the safety was engaged. He laid it out on a single page, described the manufacturing change required, and noted the cost. It was 5.2 cents per rifle. Internal Remington documentation from that period, later produced in legal proceedings, called Walker's solution the best design, and rejected it on the grounds that the cost was too high. The rifle went into production without the fix. Walker's name went on the patent. For the next 27 years, Walker worked inside Remington as the trigger he had warned about went into millions of American homes. The company celebrated what he had built while filing away everything he had warned them about. In 1971, Remington recalled the smaller Model 600 rifle over inadvertent discharges. The Model 600 used a trigger from the same design family as the Model 700. The Model 700 was not recalled. Walker retired in 1975 at 63 years old. He did not stop writing. In 1978, he sent Remington a memo suggesting that if the safety could not be relied upon to function as one, the company should, at minimum, stop calling it a safety. He proposed alternative names, an interrupter, a snubber, anything that did not carry the implication of absolute protection that the word safety carried for the man in the field who trusted his life to it. The memo was filed. In 1982, he wrote again. The memo asked the company not to introduce any new bolt-action rifle without a foolproof safety mechanism. The memo was filed. That same year, Remington quietly changed the design on new production so that the bolt could be lifted without moving the safety to the off position, eliminating the most dangerous moment in the cycle. The millions of rifles made before 1982, already in American hands, were left exactly as they were. No announcement, no recall, no letter to the men who owned them. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the people behind the guns and the decisions that shaped American firearms history, subscribe now. There is a lot more where this came from. A 1979 internal Remington analysis estimated that 1% of the Walker trigger rifles in customer hands could be made to fire without a trigger pull. At that time, there were approximately 2 million of those rifles in circulation. 1% of 2 million is 20,000 rifles sitting in American closets that would fire when the safety came off. Walker knew this. He had known something like it since 1946. He had written it down, drawn the solution, calculated the cost, and watched the paperwork disappear for nearly 3 decades. After he retired, he kept trying through the only channels still available to him: the memo, the written record, the proper way of doing things. None of it moved the company. What finally moved things was not an engineer with documentation. It was a courtroom in Texas in 1994, where a Remington expert witness demonstrated the safety of the Model 700 on the witness stand, and the rifle discharged without anyone touching the trigger. And a father in Montana in 2000 who buried his 9-year-old son then spent the next decade pulling the internal documents into the light, one subpoena at a time. The documents Walker had written were in those files: the 1946 memo, the 1948 drawing, the cost analysis, the rejected solution. All of it exactly where it had been filed decades earlier, waiting for someone outside the company to find it. In 2010, a journalist tracked Walker down to a retirement community in North Carolina. He was 98 years old. He was still building rifles in his workshop. The journalist asked him whether Remington had been a company that put profit ahead of human lives. Walker had worked for Remington since before the Second World War. He had given the company his career, his best engineering, and his repeated written warnings, and he watched all of it get filed away without action. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He said it was stupidity. Walker died in 2013. He was 101 years old. The settlement that finally replaced the trigger he had warned about in 1946 came together in 2014, the year after he died. The replacement mechanism was, in its essential design, the same blocking solution he had drawn on a single sheet of paper in August 1948. What Walker's story is really about is what happens to a man who does everything correctly inside a system that has decided not to listen. He did not leak the documents. He did not go to a journalist. He did not make noise outside the channels he was supposed to use. He wrote memos and drew diagrams and calculated costs and sent the paperwork up the chain for nearly 30 years. The rifles he warned about are still out there. His memos are in a public archive now. The solution he drew in 1948 is in production today under a different name. He called it stupidity. The men who carried those rifles into the field for 60 years without knowing what Walker knew might have chosen a different word.